Hi, everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday. My name is Kelly Engler, and I'm a university recruiter based out of our Detroit, Michigan office. Welcome to the final session of our National GT Impact Program. We're so glad you joined us, and we're looking forward to highlighting Grant Thornton's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion during today's session. Throughout the session, feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A chat box, and we'll do our best to address all of your questions. And just a quick overview of today's session. We're going to kick it off with Jonathan Phillip, who is a diversity manager at GT, and he's going to provide a brief overview of DE&I at Grant Thornton. And then we'll dive into a panel discussion with professionals involved in our business resource groups. So with that, I'll hand it off to Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and good afternoon and happy Friday, everybody. I'm Jonathan Phillip, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager here at Grant Thornton. I'm currently based out of our New York, Manhattan office, but I started in our Chicago office, and I'm from Chicago and went to University of Illinois, so I don't know if we have any U of I folks on, but throw it in the chat box. I'd love to say hi. But since my role is nationally focused, I was able to change locations. Of course, I didn't expect a pandemic and to move to a shutdown New York, but it's been a lot of fun to be able to move locations and staying at the same company. I've been on the diversity, equity, inclusion team here at Grant Thornton for 5 years, but this year I'd say has definitely been very transformational for diversity, equity, inclusion here at Grant Thornton, but also in the world. And here at Grant Thornton, we truly believe that diversity is essential to driving better business results. There have been multiple studies that have shown the positive impacts on innovation, on financial outcomes, on creativity when organizations are more diverse. But diversity in itself is not enough, because if people do not feel included and truly a part of the team, all those benefits of diversity go away. And so our approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion is to embed it into everything we do, from how we recruit to the trainings that we do, to how we send internal communications, and even working with our marketing team. So for DE&I, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, to be successful, it has to be a natural part of the culture we have, and not just in the messages, but also in our actions. And so this past year, or actually even looking back into this past summer, during the heightened social justice movement that followed the murder of George Floyd, our leadership team, all the way up to our CEO, didn't want to just do a top-down approach. They didn't want to just put out statements and share their own thoughts. They really wanted to hear from our employees on their ideas for change. And so they invited employees from each of our business resource groups to present to the leaders in the firm and ask what they want to see differently. And so as a result of that, we've made some new commitments and changes. And I'm not going to read the entire slide, but a couple that I personally have really enjoyed and benefited from this year. One is that we made unconscious bias training mandatory for all employees and partners at the firm. So everyone, including interns, have participated in an unconscious bias workshop. We also gave everyone 40 hours of chargeable or billable time for volunteer work in their communities. So basically paid time off to volunteer with organizations that you choose. And it's been really great. I personally have used that time, and I know a lot of other folks have as well. We've also looked at our policies and our benefits. And one example is that we updated our paid parental leave policy. So all employees get 12 weeks off, no matter if they are the mom, the dad, the primary, secondary caregiver, or adopting. We also took a look at where we make political donations and the policy statements that we choose. So historically, we've really only focused on policy decisions that relate to accounting. But now we've shifted and are also looking at social issues as well, and how as a firm we can help influence change. And then lastly, the one I'll call out is around our focus on mental health benefits, especially with the heightened mental health challenges with COVID-19. We've added additional vendors, time off, resources, and trainings to focus on mental health. And these are not meant just to be a one-time change, but rather ongoing ways that we further advance our diverse, inclusive, and equitable policies. This slide also lists our 9 business resource groups, which Karina and the rest of the panel will go into. But we also have the different conferences here on the slide. So externally, every year we participate and sponsor NABA, ALPA, and Ascend, but internally we host our own inclusion conference. that focus on intersectionality, social justice, and inclusion across all our business resource groups. This last year, it was a virtual conference, and sadly, it looks like it might be virtual again this year, but we had over 300 people attend, and we hope to make it even bigger, including alumni and clients this year. And then on this last slide, something I wanted to highlight is that for the first time, we released an external-facing diversity, equity, and inclusion report. And this includes a deep look at our strategy, our demographics, and our goals. Because as a firm, we strongly believe what gets measured gets done. And so we created five-year goals as part of this report that focus on the retention, recruitment, and professional development of individuals from underrepresented populations. And this report is up on our website, so I encourage everyone to take a look, glance at it, read it, and feel free to let us know if you have questions. But one of the most important parts, as I mentioned in the beginning, around diversity, equity, and inclusion, is it's not just about the numbers and policies, but it's a part of our culture. And a key way that we drive our culture of inclusion is through our business resource groups. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Karina and the rest of our panel, but I'll be staying on, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and I'll be here to answer them later on. So thanks, and over to you, Karina.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. My name is Karina Sanchez. I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior associate with the National Diversity, Equity, Inclusion team, and I am located in the Chicago office. I'm really excited that you all got to participate in this leadership program and and I'm honored to facilitate our panel discussion today. We're going to be hearing from some amazing people that I work closely in the BRG space. But before we dive into the panel, I did want to share a little bit about what BRGs are for folks that might not know or have heard that term before. And so BRGs, that means business resource groups. At other companies, you might hear them referred to as employee resource groups, but essentially they're employee-driven groups that work very closely with my team. Our BRGs make a lot of impact at GT, the biggest being drivers of our inclusive culture. I won't really go into the details of how they do that because we will be hearing some of these responses and the impact that they make from our BRG leaders. So I'll save it for them to kind of tell you how they make impact at the national level for all of our employees. And then Jonathan did mention we do have 9 business resource groups, and these touch a variety of employee identities. And so I just wanted to highlight those because I do think we do have some that other companies don't have and are unique, but the first is our African American and Allies BRG. We have a diverse abilities in Allies BRG. They really focus on supporting our disability community here at Grant Thornton. Equality GT, which is our BRG that supports our LGBTQ employees, future leaders and allies, really looking at not only just the younger leaders, but anyone who really wants to be a leader, no matter at what age or level you're at. So that's really exciting. We have the Hispanic and Latinx BRG, the Pan-Asian in Allies BRG, Veterans in Allies BRG, and Women in Allies BRG. As well as the Working Parents and Allies BRG. And so you'll notice we have an Allies for all our BRGs, and so really wanted to add that as well. Oftentimes people will see these groups and might not share that same identity of the group and think that they can't participate, but here at Grant Thornton, we really emphasize that, we want allies to be part of these groups. We want them to engage and really amplify some of the work that these BRGs are doing as well. But without further ado, I'll jump into our panel. We have some great questions for you all, but as Kelly mentioned, as our employees are sharing their stories, their responses, if any questions come up, definitely put them in the chat box. We'll try to answer those throughout, and then also try to save some Q&A for the end as well, so don't forget to do that. But let's get started. I want to start off by having the panelists share their name, their office, service line, how you're connected to the BRGs, and something that you really enjoyed doing over the past year. So I'll have Nicholas kick us off.
Thanks, Karina. My name's Nicholas Sanford. My pronouns are he, him, his. I sit in Charlotte, North Carolina. I work in our mergers and acquisitions tax practice as a manager. I am a member of all of our BRGs, but my role within Equality GT, which, like Karina said, is our LGBTQ plus and allies business resource group, is to chair our membership committee. One thing I've done, I guess, fun over the past year has been fostering dogs. It's something I always wanted to do, but was more difficult, when you're going into the office a lot. So that's been something fun that I've been doing since working from home a lot. I guess I can pass it over to Hilda.
Hi, everyone. Bienvenidos. Welcome. My name is Hilda Carrasco. I do sit in the Chicago office, and I am part of the Hispanic Latinx BRG. I am an associate second year, and I'm in the risk advisory practice. And something fun that I feel like I've enjoyed from this past year is just getting to spend more time with my family. I had started, it was my first year when I started, and then the pandemic kind of hit. So I feel like getting to have lunch with them again and having a fresh cooked meal, that's been my favorite part from this past year. EJ?
Hello, everyone. My name is Euclid Jimenez, or EJ. I am based out of the Miami office, and just like Hilda, I am part of the Latinx Hispanic BRG. I am a senior in the business risk advisory service line, and something that I have enjoyed during the past year is that with this remote environment, we have been able to connect with members across the firm in other cities and states even more than before. We feel closer to those members now, and sometimes it feels like if we know them even more than our team members. And also more family time, and I'm biking a lot. I'll pass it on to Miles. You are on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, EJ. Hello, everyone. My name is Miles Marshall. I sit in our Arlington, Virginia office. I'm part of our internal culture transformation team. And I've been the national coordinator of our African American and Allies BRG for just about 2 years now. And something that I've really enjoyed doing over the past year, I have an art background, so actually getting back to drawing and doing some sketch work has been a nice change of pace.
Perfect, thank you. For this next question, I'll actually direct it to Hilda and Miles. What made you get involved in the BRG? What are some unique opportunities that you got to be part of because of your BRG role? So Miles, I know you're up on my screen, so I'll have you kick us off.
Sure. So what made me want to get involved with the BRG was to be exposed to people with similar identities and experiences, all collectively with just similar values. Representation is a big part of anything, and seeing people who had similar experiences, who looked like me in a higher role than I was, allowed me to aspire a little bit higher and cultivate some of those meaningful mentorship and coaching opportunities. And just with my involvement in the BRG, it's opened so many doors in terms of the opportunities that I've been exposed to. Some of them include every year we have an event called EGT, and I was able to present at EGT this past year due to my relationship with the BRG, and was able to announce our Purple Paladin, which I'm sure you'll hear, or if you haven't heard a lot about, but there are organizations that the firm invests in who are nonprofits who are making changes in their communities. I've also had the opportunity to attend a number of different events on behalf of the firm, including some galas related to client work, as well as congressional events focused towards cultivating more recruitment efforts at HBCUs and encouraging students to pursue STEM degrees.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I'll have Hilda respond as well.
Yeah, so for me, I think it was based more on, just some of the values that my community kind of really values, which is just having that connection. And, just as a little bit of background on myself, I did grow up in Little Village, which is a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood in Chicago, and it just had very low resources. It wasn't really common for people to go to college. That wasn't really something that was expected of us, and we didn't really have, a mentor or a role model that we can really look up to. And I think that's still something that's really affecting a lot of communities that are of minorities and of people of color. So I think for me, when I joined the firm, I wanted to make sure that I could build community within the firm so that I could see other Latinos that were already in this space and were already making it, because it just kind of incentivized you and to believe that you could do it as well. So that was kind of like my biggest thing in doing that. And then also in building that community, that's when I met a lot of these BRG leaders, like EJ and all of the people in Hispanic BRG that encouraged me to kind of, establish a Cafecito series, which is something within the Hispanic BRG that we have on a bi-monthly basis, that there's not really much of a structure to it. We just encourage an open dialogue, and it just really helps people meet, and it helps bridge that gap of distance, like EJ had mentioned earlier. Now I know people from Miami, from New York, from California, and through the pandemic, it's just bridged that distance, and you've been able to develop more mentorship from that, more relationships, more people that are advocating for you at the table. And I think that's something that's really important that BRGs do offer, that advocacy part, because a lot of us are first generation and first generation professionals too. So with that, we didn't really have people to ask questions for on how to get adjusted into business. So I feel like by using our network within the firm to do that, it's been really helpful. And some of the opportunities that have been able to come through the BRG for me is, as an associate, I was able to present to the national leadership team, the NLT, on some of the asks that we had on what we kind of wanted the firm to kind of focus on in terms of like the Hispanic BRG, which was on attracting more talent, also retaining our members, developing them. So I think as an associate, that was a great opportunity for me to kind of, give some thoughts there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I always love asking this question because it is a different response based on who you ask. We can ask all our business resource leaders and they'll give you something different. But I think like the biggest thing is like exposing yourself to those different opportunities that might not come from your everyday role. And I think the other big one I heard is community, which I love, and just that connection and network, which I know for many of us was so critical, especially last year, this year, even right now, because we're still working from home. So thank you all for both sharing. For this next question, a common concern that we get from folks, who are interested in being part of DE&I efforts or business resource is the time commitment, which is, super valid. But I'd love to hear from Nicholas and EJ, how do you all balance your BRG role with your regular job responsibilities? And so, EJ, if you want to get us started.
Yeah. So I'll be completely honest. At times, it's not as easy to manage with the client work, especially during busy season, but just like everything else in life, it requires planning, good time management skills, and also remembering that you have a team that you can rely on, right? For example, today I'm actually covering for a colleague that was supposed to be presenting for you guys, but he had a client commitment, a last minute client commitment, so I'm here to help. So it's very important to remember that you also have other individuals that you can rely on when you have a lot of client work and when life happens. So it's complicated. It's not as easy at times, but it's manageable. And as long as you communicate, it will be easy to balance.
Yeah, and I guess to add on to that point, I think it's a little bit of a give and take, right, EJ? I mean, there's certain times when you're going to be busy and then other times when you can kind of focus more on your BRG. And I think the thing that underscores all of that, and I think, EJ was just hitting on it, and you're probably going to hear a lot of that as we go through this, is it's the supportive team culture that we have at GT that really enables that. I've never thought of, when you ask the question, how do you fit your balance of a BRG role with your regular job responsibilities? I've never thought of it this way, and I don't think my team thinks of it as not part of my job.
Mm-hmm.
They know that this is something that I am committed to, and it's something I've been doing since my first year at GT. And they know that's just a part of my career. It's not just some extra piece. It really is an integral part to what I do at GT, that they always make time for me to be involved in these things. So I think it underlies that whole important part of having a supportive team that recognizes the importance of this to you as an individual.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I would add too, like the biggest, like EJ, Nicholas emphasizes just communicating that and knowing that you have a whole team to support you. As I mentioned, the business resource groups, the national DE&I team supports them. And so oftentimes, we even had something come up this week where, our business resource groups had a lot of ideas and plans, and we're really excited for them at the beginning of the year. But, it was busy season and people kind of felt a little bit overwhelmed that, they weren't potentially going to be able to do this event that they thought they were going to be able to do. And that's where, that communication is important, because the national DE&I team is here to support them and kind of discuss okay, maybe we can push this back for next year. How can we work together and collaborate to make sure that we're not losing sight of this, but also that we're prioritizing the mental health of our employees and not making you all feel like you're burnt out. And so just wanted to emphasize that as well. For our next question, so our interns, I know Jonathan mentioned that this past year, all our employees went through unconscious bias training. And so we actually also, as part of our internship program, have the same training for our interns. And so I know many of our panelists participated in that unconscious bias training last summer. So I was curious for Miles and EJ, can you share a takeaway that you got from that training and how you leveraged that training either in your BRG role or day job?
Sure. There are so many great concepts out of the unconscious bias training. Really, for me, a lot of the things that I took from it were around selective perception and how our experiences culminate in this lens in the way in which we see the world. And while, I'd like to think that I was well versed in, what unconscious bias was going in. Leaving, I found myself just thinking it a little bit more critically and asking myself questions and peeling back layers as to my reasonings behind them. And I think that, the lessons learned show up, specifically in my BRG role, but also my day job in culture transformation, because it's one thing to educate people on what it is, how to identify it within yourself, but there's another piece of empowering others to do the work for themselves, which is, if you can't tell, is extraordinarily meaningful. You get a lot of insights about yourself and why you do things the way that you do them, and maybe who you do them with. So I'd say that that's the biggest piece that I took away is, continuous self-reflection and monitoring of, my thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors, but then taking it to the next step of, empowering others to do the same. And the training really kind of outlines strategies on approaching those conversations, which I thought was extraordinarily helpful. And, I think that it gives you the footing to do the necessary work that you have to do on your own.
Yeah, and to piggyback from what Miles was mentioning, right? The unconscious bias training was great, and it helped me to recognize that all of us have certain bias, right? And as a member of the Latinx BRG, it helped me to change my initial purpose that I had, which was mainly to focus on events or recruit members with a similar background to mine. So with unconscious bias training, that changed a little bit, right? Because he gave me another perception that maybe it's time for me to get involved with other BRGs as well. Just because I come from a Hispanic background, I don't only have to be involved in this one, right? And also maybe recruit members from different backgrounds and have events for those members as well. And I remember earlier this year, we actually had an event where members that are non-Hispanic, they share how they feel living in a community that is heavily populated by Hispanics, right? So sometimes it's stepping back, looking at the big picture and see how others may feel and see why you may have certain perceptions and see how you can change those. Yeah.
No, I love that. Thank you both for sharing. I think it's important point that you emphasize we all have biases, and it's just kind of, you don't know what you know. And so I think it's so important that, at Grant Thornton, we offer this training, and not to say like this is one and done thing, it really, that's kind of why we asked this question, as part of our training. It wasn't like, okay, like attend the question. We had like very like breakout sessions afterwards where we did get to talk a little bit about kind of how it resonates to us, kind of reflecting like what are we going to be doing differently, and kind of bring that to life, because it is important not to just like, have that knowledge, but like how are you going to act on it once you do have it? And this is the first step in our DE&I work. So thank you both for that response. I do want to remind our audience we're at the halfway point. I haven't seen any questions come in, and so we'll have 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So definitely encourage folks, to start putting questions in there, and as they come up, we'll be happy to take those. But for these last two questions that we have, they're really centered around allyship, which, for folks I haven't heard about allyship, we'll get into what that means, but it's really critical to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion work as well as our BRG work. So wanted to ask this question for Ida and Nicholas about sharing from your perspective as it relates to your specific BRG. How do you define allyship, and why is it important for your BRG to have allies?
Yeah, so I can start this one off, and I'll share a story with it. But right before I go into that, I did want to acknowledge the comment that EJ had made on, a cafecito that we had that was one of our most successful ones on, it was non-Hispanics living in Miami, and he planned all of that. And I remember it was a really fun conversation with one of the speakers kind of even mentioning that she didn't speak Spanish, but she would go to Miami and people would expect her to, they would talk to her in Spanish and would expect her to respond in that. So I think that just kind of relates with that unconscious bias. Sometimes we expect other people, because they're in a certain setting surrounded by those, to kind of do that. So it kind of keeps us a little bit more of, we need to be mindful as well. But in answering this question for allyship, the story that comes into mind is just how I even got involved again with the BRG. I was experiencing imposter syndrome when I first joined. I did mention that I am a first-generation professional. So for those of you that don't know what the term imposter syndrome is, it's just the feeling of, not feeling qualified enough, or just, qualified enough to justify being there. And I was surrounded by so many smart colleagues at GT, and everyone was super welcoming, but that was just kind of like an internal feeling that I had in the beginning as I adjusted to that new workforce. So I did reach out to people within the Chicago office. People encouraged me to join the local BRG. I did that, and then just being surrounded by them and joining the board in Chicago, which then extended to joining the national committee, and now I'm the national co-coordinator. So I started off in the programming committee at the national standpoint, and it kind of evolved to that. So I think that the importance of allyship means that you're supporting people, that you're advocating for people, and that you're, being able to kind of, give that good word when they're not at the table too. So if there's something going on and you see that someone kind of says something that isn't correct, being willing to kind of take that step in and to correct them in a polite and respectful way, and also to kind of correct our own communities. I think that there's a lot of biases and internal racism within our own communities, and it's really important to kind of address that and correct it very early on, because it could definitely lead to other things in the future. So I think, again, just to summarize, allyship is advocating for people and making sure that you're educating, you know, not just others, but yourself. Sometimes people of color are expected to kind of speak and say that the emotional trauma that they've gone through, but we shouldn't expect that from people. I think it's important for us to invest the time into educating ourselves in the inequities that are happening in our communities, and then be able to kind of go in with that lens of, you know, I did my research here, how can I help you with that? Instead of just saying, where should I start?
Yeah, I mean, finger snaps for everything that you just said, right? I mean, I definitely, you know, I don't want to repeat anything because I think you hit every single point on the head. I mean, that's a great, and I think just underline the importance of allyship. I don't think you can undervalue allyship. And I challenge all of you, you know, wherever you decide to go work, you know, engage in allyship in some respect, get involved in, you know, your BRG or ERG, wherever you end up, because that really can make differences in people's lives. I think the only thing I'll add, you know, I think that underpinned a lot of what you were saying was the active nature of allyship. And I think you all will hear that a lot, is to be an active ally. And I was listening to a podcast a couple months ago, and it was just a great analogy for what active allyship was. And I come back to this a lot, and I try to share in any platform I can because it was so impactful for me personally. The podcast, they had a guest on, Beverly Daniel Tatum. She's an author, an activist, an educator. And the analogy that she gave for really, it was specifically in terms of racism and racist systems and institutional racism, but I think it can apply really to any form of oppressive system that anyone's experiencing. But she gave the analogy of that being one of those conveyor belts, like the moving sidewalks in the airport, and how we're all on those sidewalks. And so to the extent you're on that sidewalk, you know, to the extent you're in that oppressive system, you may be getting benefits of it if it's moving you forward, right? So even though you may not be actively doing a racist behavior or an oppressive behavior, you're getting the benefits of being on that sidewalk and moving forward. And so the only way to be an ally is to turn around and use your privilege and run as fast as you can the other direction, because that's the only way that you are fighting against that system. And it takes active movement. It takes actions on your part to be anti-racist or to be an ally, or, you know, to fight any sort of oppression that you're seeing. And that's not easy. You know, like you mentioned, you know, if you hear somebody say something that you don't agree with, it is not easy to speak up. And I can tell you from experience, I have missed opportunities to speak up. And I had a friend who, luckily, she was willing to put the emotional labor in to call me out for it, or call me in and say, hey, I wish you would have spoke up for me in that moment. And the most I could do was, you know, say I would do better next time, right? And so, you know, to the extent someone is there to help you or guide you, don't take that personally as an ally. Just take it in and learn from it, and appreciate that that person was willing to help you in that moment to do better next time.
Thank you so much. I feel like those are just amazing responses. I don't really have anything else to add. And I would say maybe the only kind of perspective, because I know Hilda mentioned a little bit around even within our community, like there is internal racism. And so I think to a term that we haven't touched on yet is intersectionality. And that's really just like, for example, for me, like I'm a woman, but I'm also Latina, you know, I'm first generation. So even for me, like I can still have, like I can, as a Latina, like, and a woman, like I might not be an ally in that space, but like I'm not part of the LGBTQ community. And so as I'm thinking about like my identities where I hold privilege and not, like how can I show up for that community? And so just wanted to add that piece there, because I know it's touched on, and wanted to emphasize that we all, kind of to what Nick said, we all have areas of privilege and not, and how do we, in the areas that we do have privilege, how do we show up for others? This last question, building off to what Hilda and Nicholas were talking about around allyship, for Miles and Nicholas. And I know Nick, you got into a little bit in your response, but was there a situation where someone was an ally to you, and kind of what was the impact that had on you?
Sure, I can start. You know, I guess I'll preface this with, we have a phrase at Grant Thornton called "Make It Matter," and I think allyship is making what matters to that group matter to you. It's an intentional choice, but it doesn't have to be hard. For me, I've had a manager, and you know, when you're working with some people, you know, who have different experiences, different backgrounds, you know, everything, there's going to be certain things that are important to you and other things that are important to them, and then there's obviously a synthesis. But my manager, you know, over the past year with you know, so much specifically Black death in the media, you know, it's so easy to forget that it may not be on someone else's radar, or what, you know, so, you know, I would go into calls, you know, following, you know, a tragedy, and I would find myself at a very, you know, low point, and, you know, it wouldn't be mentioned, or I wouldn't hear, or it might be, oh, what happened over the weekend, you know, the typical call script. But it was the manager who made it a point to routinely check in on me to see how I was doing mentally, emotionally, asking me if I felt safe. And I think it's just coming from an open place of curiosity, but also with the intent of making what mattered to them matter to you. And it sounds so simple, but it means so much when someone checks in on you to say, hey, I know there's a lot going on in the world, and I just want to make sure how you're handling it. Or maybe if it's completely, you know, unaware of you, you know, doing the work to, you know, asking them, hey, what is important to you today? And just little things like that. I think that's how I've seen allyship performed on the day-to-day. It doesn't have to be, while it is a part, you know, the sponsorship and the coaching piece, and that is a piece of it, but it can be just as simple as, you know, just coming from a place of care and leading with your heart and trying to, you know, understand the concerns of the individual.
Yeah, actually, I think my one of the story I wanted to share is actually very similar. When I first started at GT, I was out to, I guess at that point I was out to mostly of my friends and I think some of my family, but definitely was not out in the workplace when I first started. And the first kind of, you know, situation that I ran into when I was like, okay, I've really got to decide, you know, what I want to do moving forward, was for the holiday party that came up. After I'd been with the firm for a couple of months, and I had to decide, I had my partner, my long-term partner that I'd been with, and I had to decide if I wanted to bring him or not. And I was very stressed about it. I didn't know how people would take it. You know, I knew we had a supportive culture, but you know, you just don't know, right? When you put yourself in that scenario, you just don't know. So I was very nervous, and so I decided to come out to the senior in my group, who I was very close to. And I told her, you know, I've got a partner and I'm trying to decide if I should bring him, but I don't know how people will take it. And what she said, I'll never forget the words. She says, we don't, you shouldn't just bring him. We want you to bring him. And she was like, we all want to get to know that side of you. We want to meet your partner. We want to know who your family is. And really, it was that one moment that I don't think was a big deal for her, but that really changed my career, because if it wasn't for that, I mean, I may have not gotten involved with the BRGs. I may not have the national role I have. I would have not gotten so many of the great opportunities that I've got for personal and professional development throughout the BRGs. Like I mentioned earlier, I mean, this is a piece of my career. It's a piece of my job. And I don't know that I would have had that had it not been for that ally who gave me that safety to bring my whole self to work. So I think, you know, it just goes back to my point earlier, where you can't undervalue the importance of allyship, because you don't know the profound effect it could have on someone's life, even if it doesn't seem like a big deal to you personally.
Thank you so much for both of those examples. I think those are great and really speak to the power of allyship, and hopefully for our audience who might be new to the term or haven't really seen examples, hopefully you were able to take some of that. And like we mentioned, whether you come to GT or wherever, you can take some of those as well back to whatever workplace you end up at. We do have about 6 minutes, so I do see some questions coming in. So one of the questions from our audience is, what are ways interns can get involved in DE&I and BRG initiatives?
I can help answer that one. So I know we have, in Chicago, we have a RUPE interns, which are, 2-year, it's a RUPE program, which kind of helps people that are from an underserved, how do you say, it's a like low financial income community. And that way, like those interns, they do end up helping us with cafecitos and kind of developing them, and they join and they ask questions. I remember, I think maybe it was a month or two ago when one of them actually had the courage to kind of ask the question of how can interns, get more involved within the firm, and we had a whole discussion within the cafecito where partners chimed in and they kind of encouraged them to do more within that. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity for interns to get involved with BRGs. It really just comes to being able to have the courage to voice it, and people are always really willing to kind of open that door.
Okay, thank you. I think that was great. And I think even from the standpoint, maybe it's not like a formal, like, I'm gonna like help the BRG, but it's even like we were talking about one of the benefits and why people join is to build that community and connection. And it's like, I know a few folks too from like our prior interns who, attended BRG events or cafecitos like Hilda mentioned, and they really admired a specific partner or someone, and they started reaching out to them, and they became a mentor. And so I think that's like another great way to leverage that BRG as an intern as well. So another question that we have is, and I know we've talked a little bit here, but not as directly. What are some tips that you have for interns who are looking more to be inclusive and respectful for folks who do have unique perspectives?
I can try this one. I think that there's a great deal of information readily available to us. We just often don't seek it out. And, I think that for anybody, interns or not, who's just looking to be more inclusive, start, with those around you. Look who around you has dissimilar experiences or traits or values. And like I was mentioning earlier with, the type of self-work that goes into it, asking yourself, hey, when I'm putting a group together to work on something, do I tend to pick the same people? Do I tend to pick the same type of people? And why is that? Do they remind me of themselves? Do they remind me of myself, or do they remind me of someone I know? There's a great deal of information out there, and I think it's about taking the first step to find that out, but then also start the conversation. I know I would love it if someone approached me and asked me hey, I want to be more inclusive, and I want to be more open to different perspectives. Have I treated you in any way that you think that this, and even as simple as that, it starts a conversation, and I think that's where everything starts.
Perfect, thank you. I know we have about 3 more minutes. I'm gonna wrap up here. I just wanted to thank our panelists so much for their time and wisdom. I hope our audience got a lot of their answers, of their questions answered, and just learned a lot. I also want to thank Kelly for putting this session together. I hope you all got a better sense of what DE&I is all about here at Grant Thornton, and the important role that our employees have in shaping our DEI efforts. We mentioned that a lot of them got to share feedback to us, to our most senior leaders, and so just wanted to kind of emphasize that. But thank you so much. With that, I'll just hand it back to Kelly.
Thanks, Karina. Just want to say thank you all so much for attending our 3-series National GT Impact program, and we hope you found it beneficial as you make your future internship decision if you haven't already done so. If you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to your local recruiter. I hope you guys all have a wonderful weekend, and thanks again. Bye-bye.